Okay, welcome to episode 6 of the Running Shorts podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lee. As a reminder, Running Shorts is a podcast that interviews runners, the community that supports them, race organizers, equipment and apparel manufacturers, and more. We speak with everyone from back of the pack penguins, mid packers, age group winners to world class elites to find out their training secrets, favorite races, and running history. Today, I have a very special guest, Steve Lastoe, the founder, president, and race director of NYCRUNS. Steve has led the organization for the past 10 years, ever since he started it in September of 2009. NYCRUNS is a race management company based out of Brooklyn. In 2020, the plan was to produce over 24 events with field sizes ranging from 1,500 to 15,000 entrants. Unfortunately, with the global coronavirus pandemic, NYCRUNS is under extreme duress, along with the rest of the running community. Revenue has fallen to about 10% of what it should be at this time of year, with no sign of relief on the immediate horizon. In-person races have been canceled through mid-April, with the possibility of additional cancellations beyond that. Most of the full-time staff has been let go, and remaining team took a 50% pay cut. In the near term, some of the events are going to be run virtually, and Steve has also implemented some very creative methods of raising funds to support his employees and former employees. So, Steve, welcome to the show. Appreciate you spending time to chat with me today.
Thank you, Andrew. But before we go any further, I think I'm going to mix a drink. The way you recapped the last few weeks of my life, really,
Yeah.
I think it's time for it's an early start, but I mean, someone's got to do it.
Exactly. It's been a really quick turn of events. We're going to spend the vast majority of time talking about these current events and how to support you and your team over at NYCRUNS. But before we get there, I think our listeners would love to learn a little bit more about you and the organization in general. So let's go ahead and move to our dynamic warm-up section. You're a New Yorker, born and bred, right?
I am.
Yep. And so you grew up in Manhattan and grew up in Long Island. Is that right?
I was born in Manhattan. We lived in Brooklyn for the first few years of my life, and then I grew up on Long Island. And
Got
I
it.
returned to Brooklyn when I was 22 or 23.
And where did you go when you left?
I was mostly in Miami. I spent some time in Orlando as well.
And so the Miami part was for fun and the Orlando part was for school. Is that right?
Arguably, it was all for school, but a lot of fun was had.
Yeah. And so you were down at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And what were you studying down there?
My degree is in, let's see, my degree is in journalism with a concentration in, it's been so long, in public relations and advertising. From my point of view, when I was a senior in college, the first Netscape browser was released. So I really pivoted towards internet things as I was graduating.
Got it. So originally when you went to school, you were going down the PR, advertising, journalism route, and then you pivoted more into technology as you were coming out of school.
Yeah, communications generally. I mean, they were all sort of jumbled together back then in a way. But it was all sort of one of the same, I think.
Got it. And so what led you to, I guess, go to the University of Central Florida in the first place?
Oh, bad decision making mostly. But my father retired in 1990, which was the year I graduated graduated high school, excuse me. And we all moved to Florida. And I was in Miami for a few years at Miami-Dade Community College. Took me a little longer than it should have because I was having a lot of fun. Miami in the early 90s was an awesome place to be. And I think that the decision for UCF was largely based around friends that were going there. It was sort of one of a number of choices. And Orlando, I knew I needed to get out of Miami. I would never finish college. And Orlando seemed like the next best bet at that point.
Got it. Yeah, Miami in the early 90s, this was the time of the U with the Miami Hurricanes, and it seemed like a really great scene down there at the time.
I'll take your word for it. I was mostly in the club scene.
So then you were there for school, and then what led you to come back to New York City?
I think a lot of it was like finishing college and starting to take those first few post-collegiate steps, and knowing that, Miami, Florida itself no longer fit me. And a girlfriend or a girl that I had dated in college had a place available, and I sort of grabbed it.
Got it. That makes sense. And so you've been here ever since when the late 90s is when you came back to New York?
Moved back in May or June of '96.
96. Okay, so the mid 90s. And when you came back, what were you doing?
Well, for a while I was temping.
Hmm.
The first and well, the second and last real job I ever had was with a company called Ziff Davis Publishing. Um, Ziff Davis back then was publishing PC Magazine and like all these computer magazines, and so that sort of wedded what was a relatively young interest in technology for me with that communications background that I spoke of earlier.
Got it. And during this whole time period, were you running at all?
I'm proud to say that I completed the Chase Corporate Challenge at least once, and then I was recruited by local running legend Tim Decker to run the Chase Corporate Challenge Championships, which that year, I'm thinking '96, was held going down Park Avenue.
Hmm.
And Tim, if you're listening, and Tim may well be listening, Tim, I hope you know that I gave up smoking for a week to come back for that race, and it was hard.
And so you were an avid JP Morgan corporate challenge racer, that sounds like.
That's the only year I ever did it.
Got it.
You have to have a real job to run the Chase Corporate Challenge, really. And I haven't had a real job since about a month or two after that championship. So
Yep, you've been doing your own thing and leading your own organization. So,
yeah.
would you say? I mean, are you an avid runner yourself, or do you more like the event production piece of it?
I'm definitely an avid runner. I mean, I love. I mean, this is interesting. So Mary Wittenberg years ago asked me, "What do you like about running?" And I couldn't answer her, but it took when I came up with the answer, I realized that I don't like anything about running whatsoever. I do like racing quite a bit, and I do like racing events or running events. So for me, like, yeah, I'm a daily runner and have been for my entire adult life, or certainly my entire post collegiate life, nearly. Um, and but you know, I like racing more than anything else. Running is the thing you have to do to get to racing.
Got it. That makes sense. So,
Yeah.
what are some of your favorite races that either you put on or that you've run for that other organizations put on?
Oh God, that's a really good question. Um, so my one of my favorite NYC runs courses. It's no longer currently a race, so I suppose it could become a virtual race. Was the original Central Park half marathon course that we came up with, which used all of the loops of the park, going through 72nd Street, going through 102nd Street, and going through the Harlem Hills. And I thought that was really cool because I'd never seen anybody come up with that before, and it's tough to come up with anything new in Central Park at this point.
Mm,
Um, so that was super cool. I really enjoy the race we do with the Brooklyn Cyclones, which is now called the Coney Island Classic, and which finally got some really good traction last year. Um, and I like that because I mean, it's generally on a really hot day, which is not the best thing for a race, but it mixes a whole bunch of things that I like, including baseball and barbecue and beer and running, and like that's really cool for me personally. If I look outside of me, Grandma's Marathon in Duluth is great. The Miami Half Marathon in Miami, of course, is wonderful. And for me, any well done, smaller, medium sized race right now, that's always something I'm really thrilled to see.
got it. Sounds like you haven't quite got all of that Miami out of your system.
I'm trying.
um, so let's talk a little bit about NYC runs and transition a little bit to our long slow distance part of this podcast. So you mentioned Mary Wittenberg, who was the former president of New York Roadrunners. Where do you see, in terms of the New York City running landscape, how your organization and Roadrunners fit together?
Hmm. I mean, first of all, I should say that Mary was super supportive when she was the CEO of New York Roadrunners, which was really nice. Um, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if NYC Runs could ever be a legitimate competitor in any sense to New York Roadrunners, I would have told you were insane.
Hmm.
And if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd say that's a nice dream. Now I think it's about as true as it can possibly be. in many ways, I think our product is better than theirs. In some ways, their product is better than ours, and that's just because they're different
Hmm.
products. Um, I think that the good news for local runners is that there is more than enough room for both of us to be whatever the heck it is we want to be, and you know that's that's good. That's a win.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so when you started NYC Runs, this was in 2009, is that right?
That is correct.
And so this was coming out of the Great Recession, or this was still in the midpoint of the Great Recession?
For me, this was the when the right after the Great Recession really hit me. The So it was, Bear Stearns had collapsed about 8 months before at that
Hmm.
point. At least eight. Well, basically, NYC Runs launched about a year after the Bear Stearns collapse, just a little less than a year. So, to put it in a time frame.
Hmm. And why did you decide that that was the right time to start NYC Runs?
Well, first of all, I can't believe you found this in your research. There was a preceding project called Runner's Loop,
Hmm.
um, that me and my friend Eric had tried launching the previous fall and decided not to go forward with. But what happened was I had a freelance IT business which had been coasting on for quite a while, and in the I guess it's the second quarter or so of 2000 of whatever year that was, 2009, a big part of that business fell away. Like I lost my main client, which was allowing me to coast, and I didn't really want to do that kind of work anymore, and I hadn't for a long time. I was actually just hanging out on my mom's couch, my parents' couch back then, and I saw a new piece of code, and I said, "This code, this program would allow me to do what I thought we couldn't do with the former Runners Loop project." And I gave myself like 2 months to see if I could pull it off.
Got it. So when you talk about this code, this was code to launch your own site for event management, or this was what piece of code was this?
Sure. So, first of all, the current iteration of NYC Runs is built was built by our current developer, Song Yi Ma, who is wonderful and a really good friend, and I'm so glad to have him as part of our company. The original version of it, though, was built by me, and I was never a full time web developer. Certainly not in the modern sense of the word, barely in the 2009 sense of the word. But it was built with off the shelf code in a CMS called Joomla, which once upon a time was much more popular than the better known WordPress or Squarespace. And so Joomla was basically, you could put a lot of pieces together and hack at a lot of pieces and make it work. And a piece of code released a Joomla program released by a guy named Azrul Rahim, whose company I can't think of the name of right now. He released a program called Jom Social, and Jom Social had a really good event calendar and some social integration stuff, and that sort of tied it all together. I was like, okay, we could probably make this work. In the early days, I spent a lot of time hacking at these
Got
things.
it. And so when you started Runner's Loop, this was originally to find races, find clubs, find running buddies, and it had a forum. It kind of sounds like a combination of, marathonguide.com and Let's Run and Flow Track and things like that. Were those any inspirations for you, or did those come after you?
um, to be honest with you, launching a marathon guide killer, or competitor, if you want to prefer a more friendly term, but let's be honest, marathon guide is a piece of
Yeah.
garbage. Um, um, John, I'm sorry, it's true. But so launching a marathon guide killer was certainly the other choice I had when I was making these decisions. And in fact, we'll be releasing a site in the next few weeks called Run This One, which is indeed intended to be a marathon guide killer, and some other things as well. But putting aside my own megalomania, the idea with NYC Runs was largely to connect runners to races and running clubs and other runners, and there was a huge social underpinning into it that really doesn't exist in the NYC Runs architecture anymore. But you have to realize this was before Facebook or anything like that was really mainstream. I mean, we had MySpace and Friendster, and that was it.
Got it. Were there ever any dating efforts as a result of this? Is this why you tried to start the running buddy finder, or was that completely unrelated?
So the In the very early days of the Running Buddy Finder, for some of the first emails I got related to somebody stalking me. I am glad to say we never went any deeper into dating.
Got it.
Not me personally, but somebody stalking somebody
Oh, got
else.
it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So
yeah. Yeah. So
there
yeah.
are all these challenges when you're launching something like that, where people have
Yeah.
the ability to contact each other. So
Yeah. Facebook can have all the social. It's fine.
so when was the transition from Runner's Loop to NYC Runs and timing and registration and your own races?
Sorry. So Runner's Loop never launched.
Mm,
It was like we killed it on its birthing bed.
mm,
Basically, it was sort of ready to go, and I just didn't like it.
mhm.
And I said to my friend Eric, who I was working on, I'm like, I don't want to do this. And we decided to part ways, and that was that. It was about a year later when I launched NYC Runs, and originally NYC Runs was just a free race calendar, really, really comprehensive and good race calendar, I might add, with these other social things and these club pages and things like that. And then about a year later, we added race registration and started pursuing clients and things like that. And then another 6 months after that, we bought timing equipment, and sort of simultaneously, I realized if we're going to do all this, we should just put on our own races.
Mm.
And that gets you up into the fall of 2011, and we put on the first Brooklyn Marathon.
Got it. So in terms of timing, just to make sure people have a good idea of this, so Runner's Loop was 2009 timeframe, or was that earlier even?
I'd say we pulled the plug on that in like late 2008.
2008, and then
this is as much attention as the term Runner's Loop has gotten in like 10 years. By the way.
It's a relic and an artifact of history. So then,
It really
in
is.
2008, that's kind of when you put it to bed. So then you launched NYC Runs as a race calendar in 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Yes, about a year
And
later.
then you in 2010 started to do race registration. Is that right?
That is
And then
correct.
2011 is your first race.
Yes.
Got it. And the 5K in Riverside Park was the first race. Is that right?
The lousy t-shirt race.
Why do you call it the lousy t-shirt race?
I thought it was a great name in 2011, and I still do.
And so that was the name of the race, the lousy t-shirt race 5K.
In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we made that into a virtual run pretty soon.
Oh, that's great.
That's exactly the kind of recycling we're doing these days.
Why did you choose Riverside Park? It seems to be a park that maybe gets a little bit less love and attention in terms of the race calendar.
Yeah, well, we were sort of guided that way by some of our early contacts in the Parks Department, and it's actually a pretty challenging place to put on a race because it's there's no way to put on a 5K without having a good number of turns. Mm-hmm. So, but it was fun. It was great.
Got it. And let's talk about that a little bit in terms of the NYC Parks Department. I remember hearing potentially in a previous interview that you had that as long as your events are under 500 people in size, it's a little bit easier to get a permit. Is that right?
It's a little bit cheaper.
A little bit cheaper.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit easier. I mean, it's very difficult to permit something on the streets the size of the current Brooklyn Marathon half marathon by comparison. But for us, doing it small was a real advantage. Number one, it helped us to be nimble, which is something that I think can help us again in the months and hopefully not more than months to come. It taught us to be nimble, but it also forced us to prove ourselves again and again, particularly as we started scaling up over the years.
Got it. And do you have a favorite place that you like to put on races? I know that you guys do a lot on Governor's Island as well during the summer.
Oh God, Governor's Island is great. It's a lot of fun to do stuff there. I have to admit, I think I prefer Prospect Park because I can roll out of bed and go to work. But they're all sort of fun. I mean, there's something to be said for being able to put on an event in Central Park. Central Park is the crown jewel of New York City in many ways. I mean, like there are times that I'm sort of amazed that we get to play there, and maybe I forget that a little bit these days. Yeah. But they're all great. I mean, they're all wonderful.
Yeah. And so you put on the first race, the lousy t-shirt 5K in 2011. But at the same time, you were still running your IT consulting business on the side. Is that right?
Yeah.
How long were you doing both simultaneously?
A couple of years. I'm not really sure anymore. It's maybe 3
Yeah.
years.
And was that for cash flow reasons, or what was the?
Um, Probably, I think so. I, I mean, like for 2000 until we started putting on races, NYC runs didn't really have any significant
Mm,
revenue. So, I mean, that puts us, let's say, that puts us into the end of 2011. I do remember there was a point where like where I, where I where I there was a year or so where I was like starting to sort of close down that business
mm.
slowly, and then it came down to like there were one or two sort of long term clients I had where I had to go to them like, listen, I don't really want to do this anymore, but thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so, how big were the first events at Lousy T-shirt 5K?
I'd have to check the results page, but I want to say 108 registered. I'll tell you what, I will check the results trades. Ask me a better
Got it.
question. Ask me another question. Another question. Your question was fine.
I could have looked that up, I guess, myself. I didn't know you would have results all the way back to 2011. So, uh,
Well, we actually had to rescore them a few years ago when we switched to our own results system. But the good news is we've wasted enough time for me to answer your question. The very first race we put on had 90 finishers.
90 finishers. Wow. And is that typically the type of attrition that you expect in a race, regardless of whether it's a 5K or a half marathon, in terms of maybe 80 to 90% of people finish who actually register?
Well, keeping in mind that I'm going off memory for that 108 registered or
Mhm.
so I could be wrong. Industry standard, it tends to be somewhere between 15 and 20%. I think we see higher in New York for a number of different reasons. I think we tend to be above 20% more than not. That's for
Got it.
sure.
Maybe people in New York, they commit early and then they don't end up following through or have other commitments.
I think that's definitely a big part of it. And I think also like we have this race deferral system, and I
Mhm.
think that might fudge our numbers a little bit, like in a way that we're not seeing.
Got it. That makes sense. So you go from the Lousy T-shirt 5K in 2011, and now your flagship race is the Brooklyn Marathon and Half Marathon. Is that right?
Always our
Always
flagship
the
race, but
flagship.
yes.
And so how many people run that race combined?
Last year we had just shy of 8,000 registered and just shy of 6,000 run.
Wow, that's great. My wife, she also ran that half marathon October 19th, 2019. I have the medal in my hand right here. So I'm looking at the logo and the banner for it. So very cool. Um,
Thank you.
let's talk a little bit about some of the events nowadays. How do you know when you've put on a great race?
How do I know? Well, I honestly, think week in and week out we do put on. I mean, well, what do you mean by a great race? Let me turn it back on you if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
so I guess at the end of that morning or that day, you go home and you feel like people got their money's worth. They were really happy with their production quality and value. That they come back and they go back online to nycruns.com that evening and they're like, I can't wait to sign up for 3 more of these things.
God, I wish. Um, um, I think the fact of the matter is that we're at a point now where we expect to operate on that level each and every week.
Mm,
That we each and every time we put on a race. Like I don't. And if we do have a bad day, we don't expect the runners to know
mm,
about it. It happens sometimes. I mean, there are some things that are just completely out of your control. I'm trying to think of what was a bad race. What I thought was a race where we disappointed the runners. Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So last April, we just canceled this race yesterday. Unfortunately, the Prospect Park 5K and
mm,
10K. Um, we we had a protest situation. First of all, it's a complicated race to put on because it's got multiple starts and it's got about 2,500 people registered and there's a lot
mm,
going on. On this particular day, we had protesters coming out for something unrelated to us, but we knew they were
mhm.
coming. We knew they were going to get in the way. We also had massive rain forecast. We thought that would really just sort of take care of the protest thing in itself. It really didn't. And so we had this crazy thing with the protests that we're trying to deal with and trying to sort of protect the runner's experience while being respectful of whatever the heck they were on about. And we had this spread out thing and these difficult conditions to work in because rain is really really harsh, and like like we screwed up scoring a little bit, which we're able to fix. We screwed up pictures, which we were not able to fix. I think our photographer didn't show up, and like nobody
Mm,
realized it. So I mean, that's a bad day, but that's the kind of thing that, to a certain extent, like if you're going to have a bad day, those are the conditions you want to have a bad
right,
day.
because people give you the benefit
We
of the doubt that day.
You
Yep.
would hope. But I mean, I can't tell you how proud I am of the team at NYC Runs. I mean, what people don't realize if they don't run races outside of New York, or what they quickly realize if they do run races outside of New York, is nobody does it like we
Mm,
do it here. Not the rock and roll group who do great work, not the hot chocolate people, none of the, a lot of the mid-sized races, whatever you want, I don't want to call out too many names, but the the city of New York forces us to perform to such a
mm,
level that you have no choice but to be the best. And for us, the measuring stick was very obviously New York Roadrunners early on. And we had to be at least plausibly as good as New York Roadrunners in some ways, or the runners would go, "This isn't as good. We can't take them
mm.
seriously." Um, so I think we reached that level of like great pretty easily. I mean, transcendent is probably more of an aspiration for us at this point, and I don't know if that's
Yeah.
realistic or not.
And so when you say the city of New York forces you to perform at such a high level, are you talking about the actual government city, or are you talking about the racers and the people that live here and run these races?
Both, but I was really thinking about the government, and in terms of just having your stuff figured out. The expectations that you'll have, and this should be the expectation everywhere, but the expectation that you have your stuff figured out ahead of time, that you know what's going on, that you know what your vehicles are doing, where your equipment is, what your staff is doing, that you've got your stuff
Hmm.
together.
That makes sense.
And that should be the expectation everywhere. But I mean, in New York, it's a high bar to clear.
Right.
Again, it should be. And the product of New York Roadrunners and the product of NYC Runs, in my opinion, reflects that, and reflects it very, very
Got it.
well.
And so at this point, do you feel like everything is a very well-oiled machine in terms of how events are run from the NYC Runs perspective?
I did a couple weeks ago, but mostly yes, yes. I'm there's always room for improvement. I think that I largely define my operational role as sort of really paying attention to the details and trying to find improvement. And I'm not sure when you're ready to transition and talking about what's going on now, but for me, the great disappointment in business wise, as far as Corona
Hmm.
goes, is that I was really, really happy with where we were at and the platform the plateau we'd reached that we could
Yep.
build upon. And I was enjoying the opportunity to really just manage and
Yeah.
improve things in a way that we hadn't been able to
Yeah.
before.
So let's
So
let's talk about coronavirus and the impact. So
yeah. Sorry to
no,
sorry to
it's a
segue you.
great transition. Right now the running world's in a lot of hurt. Specialty running stores like Brooklyn Running Company are closed. Olympics have been postponed till 2021. You guys have had to cancel events and postpone events as well. I mean, it seems like things have just changed so rapidly. I know that you guys had your last in-person race, the Spring Fling, on March 8th, and then I think about today is March 24th. So we're talking 16 days later. And how many races have already had to be postponed and now going to virtual?
We've postponed two races. The Queens Half Marathon and 5K has been postponed till November
Mhm.
21st, where we had another Queens date that we could easily use, and that worked well for us. And yesterday we canceled the Prospect Park 5K and 10K benefiting Canva, which will not be made up this year. As to virtual races, we've launched a bunch. We launched a virtual version of Queens because it seemed like the right thing to do. With Prospect Park, we decided not to do
Got it.
that.
And so, talk to us a little bit about how you're trying to manage some of these challenges during this downturn. So I think in the intro I mentioned that revenue is about 10% of what it should be this time of year. What are some of the things that you're doing with these virtual races and other than that to kind of bring in cash and support your team at this time?
Well, we do. I don't think that virtual races are going to have a meaningful impact on revenue. I think those are far more important for the people that are doing them than anything else. I mean, that's important. We're doing them, and like, you know, you cannot expect to replace 90%, maybe more than that, of your revenue with something that's not the same thing, just because you pop it out there. Um, so and I realize that the running industry at large is really pushing into the virtual thing for a number of reasons right now, and but I don't think it's a replacement, and I don't think anybody should be thinking it's going to satisfy their revenue needs by any stretch of the imagination. Um, the other things that we've done, the Save Our Staff fundraiser, the discounted 2021 race credit sale, those things are helpful. The Save Our Staff fundraiser is particular. I've been very happy with. Um, the difficulty, but the difficulty is that we don't know when this is going to end, and that makes things like the SBA disaster loan, kind of far more important to our overall planning right now.
So, Steve, maybe you can explain for everybody what is the Save Our Staff fundraiser?
The So Save Our Staff. So we had to lay off most of our staff pretty suddenly. We saw revenue drop in two steps over about the course of a week. First to about 50%, then to about 10%. And staffing is a huge part of our budget, and you can't not pay people just because revenue is not coming in. Legally, you have to sort of make a decision there. So we made that decision, rather quickly. There was some forethought to it, but not as much as we might have liked to have had. The Save Our Staff fundraiser basically is the idea behind that is that we'll be able to either bring those people back sooner rather than later, or put some stopgap things into the mix that might generate some revenue for them. We sort of put it together with the preface that this was for them, but we were going to make up our own mind about how to use it, and we still haven't really figured out what the best path is. It'd be nice to have some sort of signifier of what's going to happen next or when there's an end to this, but I don't know when we're going to get that yet, and obviously nobody does.
What's the difference between the Save Our Staff fundraiser and the race credits? Are they donations to laid off staff?
So first of all, NYCRUNS is a for-profit small business. That's important when you start using the word donation. So and fundraiser sort of walks the line there. But the idea is with Save Our Staff, which I believe is the multi-year package. Yeah, the multi-year, the packages you mentioned. The idea is that money is earmarked to bringing back employees as early as possible. So that's the underlying idea there. The race credit sales are a little bit more about supporting the company, though all of it supports the company ultimately.
So, Steve, how'd you come up with the idea of the Save Our Staff fundraiser? People can sign up for a 1 year package for 2021 and pay $650 and get all races included. 2 year package, pay $1,000, get 2 years of races included. 5 year package, pay $2,000, get all races included. And $3,000 for a 10 year package to get all races included. These are all the races that NYC runs that you guys own and operate yourself. Where did that idea come from?
I mean, in all honesty, it's like nothing we've ever done before. But my thinking on it was that we know that a certain segment of our audience is pretty well to do. I mean, we put on entertainment events in New York City. I mean, there's some decent people. There's people here who have amassed decent, um, whatever the term is. Well, thank you. So the idea was that if a small number of those people helped out, did something big, we could take that out of future revenue, and it really doesn't hurt us very much to take that out of 2021 or 2022 revenue. It's a rounding error, and in a perfect world, you know, sometime around May 1st, we'd have an idea of when we're going to be able to put on races again. And at that point, we'd be able to bring staff back somewhat earlier than we'd need them in some capacity. And that was what we were trying to gamify.
So, Steve, where did the race credit idea come from? It seems pretty similar to buying gift cards for restaurants, which is an idea that's going around right now as well.
Yeah, and to your point of comparison, less successful because a it lacks the emotional appeal, and b a lot of people are doing things like that. It's a very and that's fine. I mean, there are plenty of small businesses needing, and please support any small business you can. Um, any small business you can. Your neighborhood bakery, your whatever. I don't care. Um, um, but I mean, so and again, you're sort of putting things out there, and you're grateful for whatever revenue it generates, but you cannot expect any small business, or for that matter any large business, because I know everybody's going after the airlines for a multitude of reasons, to endure through a 90% revenue loss, or an industry-wide shutdown, or whatever you want, however you want to characterize some of the economic shocks that are going through our system right now. Yeah, I mean, um, and I can't stress enough that the message should be that we're all in this together. Small businesses, people who need jobs, waiters, airline industries, maybe a little less they're in it with us, but they should be. And that the lesson to take away from the big lesson we have to take away from all this is that our lack of preparation reflects our fundamental. I know you were looking for a real lecture here. Our lack of preparation as a society, something like this, is unavoidable. But what's reflected in and how we've been able to react is a need to improve on a societal basis. I mean, that goes for NYC Runs needs to do things that it's not doing. I had to kick myself in the head this morning for not responding to an email from our landlord, Industry City, saying, "Hey, can you help out with this project?" And we can help out with the project. I think, at least I told them we could if they need our vehicles. Um, so, I mean, help out any way you can. It doesn't matter.
Yep, we're all in this together, so let's pitch in and support each other.
Yeah, and be positive.
So, Steve, what's the end game here? How does this play out? Is the goal to start racing again in the summer?
That would be ideal. There could be some casualties for a number of reasons, but in an ideal world, and I don't think this is necessarily going to happen. We're able to start doing events in mid-May, and we bring back our staff in either a full-time or a highly part-time capacity. There are some wild cards there, but ultimately full-time, and business returns to usual. I don't know that that's going to any of those ideals are going to happen exactly as I'd like.
So, Steve, you talked about the SBA, Small Business Administration disaster loan. Can you explain for the listeners what that exactly entails and means?
I feel poorly positioned to answer that, but the in part because it hasn't been so well explained by the SBA. Um, but the SBA is making loans of up to 30 years at a 4% interest rate, which is very low, or pretty low, um, available to small businesses for up to $2 million. Um, so and they just this becomes available whenever FEMA declares an area a disaster area, or an economic disaster area in this case. So New York joined the ranks a couple days ago. Um, as a business, and we haven't completed ours yet, so if I'm wrong about some of this, like, look, everybody who owns a business, you should be figuring this out for yourself, not listening to me. But I mean, listen to me, but don't take my word as the gospel. Um but as a business, you fill out a form online and you submit some documents, and my understanding is that FEMA then makes a determination of how much aid you are due based on certain budgetary items. um but And if this goes on for 2 months, to a large part, that's that's going to help us out, but it's not that relevant. It's not that big a deal. Like it'll help, but there's nothing we can't survive with by 2 months of this. You know, if this goes on for 6 months, or 4 months or 6 months or a year or whatever it is, then like I don't know what that means. I don't know how that picture shapes up. You know, but yeah.
So, Steve, you're saying if this goes on for more than 4 months, this starts to become an existential issue for the entire running community and endurance sports community?
I don't think there's any world where I have to believe there's a world where we're all putting on endurance races again. I think that's fair. And I have to believe that world is certainly no further away than next spring. I mean, I have a hard time believing even that's out of the question. So, one way or the other, NYC runs will survive that. How it comes out the other side, I have no idea.
And how have you been coping with all of this and keeping sane during this time, Steve?
Keeping sane. Uh, I didn't think that was expected. I think like everybody else, I'm doing the best I can. I've been running a lot, which is good. Um, you know, I think more than anything, I've been thinking a lot about my father recently, and my father was a very, very sort of simple guy. Not simple, not like stupid, but just like didn't have a lot of needs for himself. So I'm trying to sort of just take some lesson from how I think he might have responded to this. And he was very, very chill and very just about taking care of his family and things like that. So I think I'm trying to try to just shunt my own issues to the side as much as I can, but that's not so easy in practice. So yeah.
Steve, what were some of your goals for NYC runs before the coronavirus pandemic, and how have these goals changed now as a result?
If if near term means, let's say, by July 4th, my goals for NYC runs were to continue developing the Brooklyn Marathon and half marathon into one of the largest road races in the world. Um, were to continue our growth overall, which was very strong leading into this, to continue developing community relations in particular, and some new events outside of New York City that we were working on, including Trenton. The How that changes, I'm not sure yet. I wish I could tell you. I think that there's this big wild card between knowing you're going to be there and what is going to be, and like I think I have to be in the moment to actually answer that question.
Steve, if NYC runs goes away and you weren't doing this anymore and you were starting from scratch, what would you be doing?
Um, hmm. Well, I mean, I am excited for us to launch Run This One, though the timing isn't all that great. And there are some industry things that I'm interested in. Um, if I'm starting from scratch again, I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, there are things that I want to do, but they've always been done with the idea that NYC Runs was a functioning sort of thing backing them up. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, sorry, we're not going to talk about that anymore. Pretty morbid topic.
Yeah, that's a bleak question.
Let's move to the fartlek section of our conversation. Just some fun word association. What's your favorite post-race beverage?
A beer.
What kind of beer?
Ooh, anything from any local Brooklyn beer, any 6 point IPA.
Do you run with your watch, your phone, or neither?
Occasionally with a watch, always with a phone.
Why is that?
Because otherwise I'd go out of my mind.
Do you listen to music, podcasts, or neither?
These days, mostly podcasts.
Which podcasts are you listening to?
Let's see. Star Wars Minute. A lot of Mets related podcasts. Business Wars, uh, whatever Malcolm Gladwell's thing is called. Sorry, Malcolm.
Revisionist
Um,
history.
Revisionist history. Thank you. um, I think those are my biggies right now.
And Steve, you were also a podcaster yourself, right?
I'd like to think I still am a podcaster, but yes.
Can you fill us in on what your podcasts were about?
So I have been a part of 3 podcasts. I have been a part of Joe Garland's, oh crap, Joe, what do we call it? New York City Running Podcast, I think it was called. In the very early days of NYC Runs, and if you want to hear me, if you want to hear me engage in blatant hypocrisy, I'm sure some of those episodes will help. So, and then independently, I have been a part of 2 minute by minute podcasts, which are podcasts that break down movies in small chunks. So Jonathan Carlisle and I did the Princess Bride Minute, which did the Princess Bride in 1 minute chunks. So 99 episodes of us talking about the Princess Bride with guests. I can tell you that the Battle of Wits gets incredibly witless after you've talked about it for 2 weeks. But I'm very, very proud of that effort. Then subsequently to that, I did a podcast with Jerry O'Brien, another local Brooklyn boy, called the X Minutes podcast, where we did the very, very first X-Men movie from back in 1999 in variable minute chunks, if you will, X Minutes. And we then decided not to go on to the other X movies because this wasn't captivating to that level.
Yeah, there's a lot of X-Men movies. It's very hard to keep up.
Yeah, well, I think part of it was that Marvel bought the X-Men franchise, and it really got bad towards the end. So yeah, I mean, and I've been a guest on many. The whole movies by minute community as a whole is a thing that not everybody knows about, but I've been a guest on many of those, including Star Wars Minute, which started the whole thing.
Yep, movie by minute podcast definitely sounds like its own unique subculture.
It is definitely a subculture of its own.
Okay, switching back to running. When you run, do you go by yourself or do you go in a group?
Largely I go running with my dog Odie. So he's my primary running partner. But occasionally I run with other friends. You know, it depends.
And what kind of dog is Odie?
Odie's a pointer hound mix.
Is Odie faster than you or slower than you?
He is faster than nearly everybody I know. And he's not a young dog anymore, so it's even more impressive.
When racing, would you rather win the race or run a personal record?
Oh God, I've never won a race. I'd like to win the race.
That's right. You just have to find the small enough race and then you can win that race.
Hey, good things happen to slow runners at small races. But I've got 1 second place finish in my history, and it was about a 9-person race.
Do you consider yourself a low mileage or a high mileage runner?
Probably on the low mileage size. I don't think I've rarely had a week that exceeds 40 miles.
Do you prefer to run fast or run hills?
I like hills and races. I never really thought of it that way, though.
Do you prefer to run in the morning, afternoon, or evening?
Morning runner.
Why?
I have no idea. Yeah, I was an evening runner at one point, then I became a morning runner.
All right, Steve, we're hitting the cool down section of our show. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to share?
I think we covered a pretty good breadth of comments of material. I'll mention that I'm doing some writing right now, and some of that's going to be running business related. Already is, and you can find that on Medium.
And that's medium.com/@Lastoe. And what are you going to be writing about, Steve?
Well, I don't know how much I'm doing or what I am doing, but I've written 2 articles. One of them was about our escape from Switzerland a couple weekends ago, and the other was about how to handle refunds and cancellations when you have to do them. There's a part of me that's, so you asked me about what I would do before, and I sort of briefly said, well, there's some stuff in the industry I'd like to do. I definitely have some interest in doing some stuff in the wider industry, but that's hard to do when you're also doing NYC runs. So, some of that might be me taking the time to publish some thoughts I have on things like registration and timing and marketing and just how to run a successful race business.
Okay, that concludes episode 6 of the Running Shorts podcast. This one with Steve Lastoe, the founder of NYC Runs. If you want to support NYC Runs, the best way to do so right now is to go to their website, www.nycruns.com, and sign up for a race. Thanks, Steve, for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.